Welcome to Module 5.6.2, Introduction to Invertebrates and Phylums Porifera and Cnidaria. There is a major dichotomy or fork or branch in the animal kingdom, and this includes the animals that have backbones, the group to which humans belong, which is called vertebrates, and then animals that lack backbones, and these are the invertebrates. And we're going to first present the invertebrates to you. So these are all under Kingdom Animalia, and they have all the features of Kingdom Animalia that we gave you in the last module. And here are the 8 groups of invertebrates. I want you to notice that they don't have a common suffix like we saw with the fungi and with the plants, but they have distinctive endings to their names. So we're going to learn 8 out of approximately 35 animal phyla. And these 8 are the big 8. And we're actually going to learn a 9th phylum that contains the vertebrates, but that will be later, and that will be the unit after Exam 5. So you won't have to worry about that on Exam 5. So let's go ahead and go through these. We're going to learn first about phylum Porifera. And the etymology of this name, it means pore bearing. I-F-E-R-A, Ifera or iphora means bearing, and pore, it means pore. So these are the animals that have pores. And so if you think of a typical sponge, that's what we're thinking of. Here we can see living sponges, which look somewhat different than like the bath sponge that you might be familiar with. So it includes the sponges, and these animals have a somewhat unique body plan. It's sac-like, and it has many different pores. And let me just go to the next slide, and I'm going to draw this for you over here on the side of this. And so with that, you should make it a similar drawing. Find a space in your notes. And of course, all sponges are aquatic. So this is the ground, and here's the water above them. And so we're going to draw our little sponge body. It's going to look somewhat like a vase. And we're going to have it sliced open. And of course, there are many pores, and these are the canals that the pores lead to on the side. And so this is called the osculum, or the excurrent opening. Osculum equals the excurrent opening. And each of these would be a pore, and then that's a canal. And to show you further, we're going to zoom in on one of these canals. And so we're going to show you that the pore leads to a canal. And this is going to be greatly magnified, and I'm going to draw it down below here. And so what we would see in that canal is it would be lined with these special cells. So here's the cell body. There's the nucleus. And then it would have a collar of sorts, kind of like a little basket, greatly exaggerating its form there. And so I'm going to draw a bunch of these because this is what is there. And so I'll draw 2 on the top and 2 on the bottom. But we'd also see these guys on the bottom. So lining both sides of this canal are these special cells that are called collar cells. And you can see why they're called collar cells, because they have that little basket-like collar. They have a technical name that we're not going to learn. But so over here would be the pore, and this would be the canal. And so water would come in like this, and these little flagella beat, and they create a current, and they actually strain food particles out of the water currents that they create. And so going back to our sponge drawing up here, the water comes in, goes through these cells, the food particles are filtered out, the water goes into this opening and then out. And so this is the way that sponges filter feed. And so the skeleton of sponges, if we look right here, for the second feature, is made out of two different types of material. One are called spicules. One is called spicules, and spicules are little needles made out of calcium carbonate or of glass. And so they're either glass needles or limestone needles, and these provide support and protection. And the other part is a protein skeleton, a proteinaceous skeleton, and this is the familiar sponge that you might use for faux painting or whatever if you listen to Martha Stewart or something like that. I don't know. Now, sponges feed by filter feeding, and that's an important feature to remember. All sponges are filter feeders, and they have these special cells called collar cells. And they have, of course, in a bunch of pores and cavities, a bunch of tubes that are lined with these choanocytes. They have varying patterns of canals, if you will. The symmetry of sponges is either asymmetrical or it may be radially symmetrical. Reproduction occurs sexually and asexually. Sexually, it just occurs with gametes, eggs and sperm from male and female, and they're released into the water. At least the sperm is released into the water. Sometimes eggs will be retained in the female and then released after fertilization. And then asexual reproduction occurs by budding, and that's when just a little sponge grows at the base of a big sponge by mitotic cell division. Now, the ecological and economic importance. Sponges used to have greater economic importance before we could make artificial sponges, but now we can make artificial ones. The real ones don't have near the importance that they did. Ecologically, however, sponges are symbionts. Lots of algae live there within them. They occur, some organisms can eat sponges, some sea turtles will munch on them and things like this. And so they can be an important part of the food chain. Here's a little drawing we made earlier, and here's a sponge. Here is a textbook drawing of the sponge body. This actually has the virtue of showing a couple more cell types. We only showed the collar cells, and notice that there's these other cells out here. This is how nutrients get from cell to cell. For example, in these cells that line the body wall, so there's three types of cells here. I've just circled them. Not that that's some big deal, but the collar cells especially, you should remember. And we used to think that sponges were not on the main line of animal evolution, and DNA analysis has shown us that they are, and so they are important animal ancestors. And with that, we're going to leave the sponges and move to a second phylum, the second of the invertebrate phyla, and that phylum is phylum Cnidaria. Obviously, the C is silent, but the root that makes up the word Cnidaria means stinging or stingers. And so this is considered to be the phylum that contains the stingers, and it includes the jellyfish, the corals, the sea anemones, and others. These are all aquatic as well. The majority tend to be marine. There are a few freshwater forms. And of course, I did mention corals, I think, but if I didn't, we should definitely remember that they fall here. Their body plan is interesting. They have a sac-like gut, which means they have an incomplete digestive tract. It only has one opening where the mouth is the same opening where waste comes out. And this has two tissue layers. Now, I didn't make a point of emphasizing it for the sponges, for phylum Porifera, but sponges have no tissue layers, and these guys have two tissue layers, and we would actually name these two tissue layers endoderm and ectoderm. And they have no body cavity. In fact, what sometimes fills their body is gelatin or jelly, as in the jellyfish. So the skeleton, they don't really have one except for the gelatinous layer that can provide both support and buoyancy. For feeding, these animals are all predatory. They have tentacles that have stinging cells, and they use this to subdue their prey. Their symmetry, the adult has radial symmetry, that is, there are multiple lines or planes of symmetry that can be drawn through the body, creating mirror image halves, while the larva has bilateral symmetry. This suggests that they evolved from a lineage that had bilateral symmetry. Now, in the life cycle, there are two alternate forms. The polyp, which is a stationary, and it kind of looks tree-like because the branches are the tentacles of stinging cells, and so it is stationary. Our sessile would be the word that we would use to describe that. S-E-S-S-I-L-E is the same thing as stationary. And of course the sessile polyp reproduces asexually. The other life cycle stage is the medusa. The medusa is a floating motile stage, and it reproduces sexually. And of course, you should recall that Medusa was a figure in Greek mythology. I think she was one of the Gorgons. But anyway, the reason we invoke her name here in zoology is because this form of the Cnidarian life cycle has tentacles that remind us of the snakes that Medusa had for her hair. And that's where the name Medusa comes from. We can visualize the incomplete digestive tract of cnidarians here. This animal that's shown here is a hydra. It is sessile, and it shows right here the mouth, and that would be the mouth/anus, because food goes in. We can see a dead prey item. This is a water flea that's in there. It's a sac-like gut. After this guy's digested, then the waste will come right back out the same way it went in. We do need to learn more about the stinging cells, and in this case, you do need to know the technical name, which is cnidocytes. And cnidocytes are so named because they are stinging cells, and cnido means stinging. And this is also the feature for which the phylum Cnidaria is named. And you can see it shows in kind of increasing magnification. It shows a hydra and it shows tentacles, and they zoom in. These little spots here represent stinging cells, and each one of them is like this. It's like a little oval structure with a trigger, and if that trigger is touched, they will shoot. And when they shoot, they have a point and a barb, and it will hook in, and it actually injects a toxin called a hypnotoxin. These hypnotoxins can be very, very potent, and some jellyfish stings are fatal within just minutes. And so it's interesting to consider that. Now, to avoid extremely toxic stings of jellyfish that live on the Great Barrier Reef, Australian lifeguards used to wear pantyhose, and pantyhose can help to protect the cnidocytes from penetrating and keeps the wearer safe. Now, of course, the macho lifeguards wear body glove wetsuits or something instead of these pantyhose. Here's what. Here's actually a sign on a beach in Mexico. I don't know how many of you have been stung, but I've been stung by jellyfish, and this is a warning. On the left, we can see an actual polyp, and on the right, an actual medusa. These are both very small forms. Here we can see the life cycle, and the thing to recognize is that it alternates between the moving medusa and the sessile polyp. And in this case, this is a colonial polyp. But you see what happens, that we have an egg and a sperm. They fuse and form a diploid zygote. It grows into what is called a planula larva, and it has a bilateral form, one line of symmetry. And we can see it settles and on the bottom, and then it'll grow into a polyp. And the polyp is sessile and reproduces asexually. In this case, we can see that it buds off these little buds that become medusa. And so there we can see one that's getting ready to bud off. One last topic that we should address before we leave the cnidarians is the fact that coral is included here. And coral reefs are a critically important habitat. They're considered the tropical rainforests of the oceans. And if you know about biodiversity in rainforests, you know that more than half of the species on Earth live in tropical rainforests. And so this is saying that the tropical rainforests of the oceans, the points where the places where there's the greatest biodiversity, are coral reefs. And it's important that during lab that you look at a piece of coral and look closely, and you'll see that there are little pores in this calcium carbonate structure. Coral is a colonial polyp. It doesn't have a medusa, it only has a polyp. And as they grow, they create this calcium carbonate exoskeleton, what you would actually call the coral. But the little pores inside would actually have little polyps inside there. Now, the way that these guys can survive in such close density, they are almost plant-like, and it turns out that they are quite plant-like because they have mutualistic algae that live within their bodies. Now, these algae are so important, I'm going to make you learn the technical name of them. They're called zooxanthella. And zo means animal and xanthella means yellow. These kind of have a yellow pigment that's photosynthetic. And in any case, this is the reason that coral has to live in shallow water. It's because they require light for photosynthesis. And this shows a thriving coral reef. This shows an aerial view. Maybe I think this is a Great Barrier Reef. This might be Australia here. And this is the reef. Of course, the largest reef in the world is the Great Barrier Reef, which rings a large part of Australia. In any case, corals are threatened because of global warming. When we release carbon dioxide from burning fossil fuels especially, that can build up in the atmosphere and make the temperatures warmer. Warmer water temperatures can cause the loss of the zooxanthella, then the coral dies and becomes all white, and we say that it's bleached, coral bleaching. In any case, these reefs are a marvel. If you've never seen one, you should make an attempt to see the reefs. And many of the reefs have been degraded by collecting. For example, if you want to have reef fish for your aquarium, then the way that they get them is people in third world countries will go and degrade the reef. Sometimes they break it apart to catch fish that hide inside it, or they may even dynamite it at times. They can use toxins to poison the fish. In any case, coral reefs are a critically important part of the biodiversity of the world. And with that, we're going to conclude this module.